Hook. Sophia Carrington thought she had sold her soul for her family's survival. Rehook. But when she fell for her husband's young driver in the shadow of Monaco's casinos, she discovered that some prices are paid in bullets, and some forbidden love stories end with 3 people dead in the Mediterranean sun. If you're captivated by forbidden romance, deadly obsession, and how Monaco's billionaire elite dispose of their problems when love threatens their empire, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for more shocking true crime stories that will leave you speechless. But let's go back to where it all began. Casino Square gleamed like a jeweled crown under the Mediterranean sun, where every marble stone whispered secrets of fortunes won and lost in the shadows of Monaco's Belle Epoque palaces. In this playground of the ultra-wealthy, where Bugattis purred alongside Rolls-Royces and champagne flowed like water, Sophia Carrington had learned that paradise could also be a prison. At 32, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that stopped conversations mid-sentence. Platinum blonde hair that caught Mediterranean light like spun gold, emerald eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sadness, and a figure that made Chanel gowns look like they were designed specifically for her body. But beneath the Cartier diamonds and Hermès scarves lived a woman slowly suffocating in a cage built from marble, gold, and the desperate choices she had made 5 years ago. Her husband, Viktor Petrov, was 55 years old and one of Russia's most ruthless oligarchs, a man who had clawed his way from the rubble of the Soviet Union to build an $8 billion empire through oil, steel, and methods that left bodies buried across Eastern Europe. Viktor collected beautiful things with the obsession of a man who had grown up with nothing: vintage Ferraris, priceless Monet paintings, Arabian racehorses, and wives. Sophia was his third acquisition in the matrimony department, purchased with a prenuptial agreement that made her little more than an expensive ornament in his collection. Their sprawling penthouse perched above Monte Carlo harbor like a fortress, where Viktor's 200-foot yacht, the Tsarina, dominated the marina, casting shadows over lesser vessels like a floating monument to power and control. Sophia had married Viktor not for love, but for survival wrapped in desperation and tied with a bow of family duty. Her father's prestigious London investment firm had collapsed spectacularly during a market crash, leaving the family not just bankrupt, but facing serious fraud investigations that threatened to destroy 3 generations of respectability. Her younger brother Oliver was staring at potential prison time, and her aging parents faced the humiliation of losing everything they had worked for. Viktor's marriage proposal had come with a simple transaction: become his wife, and Oliver's legal problems would vanish along with the family's crushing debts. The alternative was watching her family crumble while Oliver rotted in prison. Love, she had learned, was a luxury that people like her simply couldn't afford when survival was on the line. For 5 years, she had played the perfect Russian oligarch's wife with the dedication of a method actor. She attended charity galas draped in diamonds that cost more than most people's homes, smiled for society photographers while her soul withered behind her eyes, and entertained Viktor's dangerous business associates with the grace and intelligence that had attracted him in the first place. But Viktor's control was absolute and suffocating, like living underwater where every breath had to be stolen. He monitored her phone calls through sophisticated surveillance equipment, tracked her movements through a network of bodyguards who reported her every conversation, and made decisions about every aspect of her existence, from what designer clothes she wore to which friend she was permitted to keep. Their marriage was conducted in separate bedrooms of their palatial penthouse, a business arrangement where Viktor showed more genuine affection to his prized collection of Russian blue cats than to the woman who bore his name. The loneliness was crushing, a weight that pressed down on her chest, until some days she wondered if she would simply stop breathing from the sheer, suffocating emptiness of it all. Sophia spent her endless days wandering through their marble halls like a ghost haunting her own life, reading Tolstoy and Dostoevsky in their library overlooking the harbor, or standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the yachts come and go while wondering what freedom might feel like against her skin. She had lost contact with most of her old London friends after the marriage. Viktor disapproved of her common associates and their corrupting influences, and the wives in Monaco's elite circle were more interested in vicious competition than genuine human connection. That's when Marco Silva entered her world like a summer storm that changes everything in its path, beautiful and dangerous, and impossible to ignore. At 21, Marco possessed a rare combination of natural beauty and quiet intelligence that made him impossible to overlook, even in a city where stunning people were as common as expensive cars. He was tall and lean with olive skin that spoke of his Brazilian heritage, dark eyes that sparkled with ambition and barely contained fire, and a smile that could melt glaciers or stop hearts, depending on his mood. Despite his humble background as the son of a São Paulo taxi driver who had worked 3 jobs to feed his family, Marco carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going in life, even if the path remained unclear. Viktor had hired Marco as Sophia's personal driver after his previous chauffeur had been reassigned to Moscow following a mysterious incident that no one discussed, but everyone whispered about. The young Brazilian had impressed Viktor's head of security, Dmitry Volkov, with his impeccable driving record, his ability to speak 5 languages fluently, and his martial arts training that made him useful for more than just transportation. But more importantly, Viktor believed that Marco's youth, foreign background, and desperate need for employment would make him loyal, controllable, and absolutely no threat to his carefully constructed world of power and possession. From the moment Marco walked into the Petrov penthouse wearing his perfectly tailored black suit and that devastating smile that seemed to light up the marble halls, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the dangerous, electric thrill of genuine human connection with someone who looked at her like she was a real person rather than a beautiful object to be admired and controlled. Marco's first day as Sophia's driver began with instructions delivered by Dmitry Volkov in his thick Russian accent and cold, calculating eyes that had seen too much violence. You drive Mrs. Petrov where she needs to go, you protect her if necessary, and you speak only when spoken to, Dmitry had said, his scarred hands adjusting Marco's tie with the precision of a man who had strangled people with similar silk accessories. Mr. Petrov values discretion above all else. Mrs. Petrov's safety and reputation are your only concerns. Everything else is invisible to you. But discretion became impossible the moment Marco saw Sophia descending the penthouse's marble staircase like something from a Renaissance painting come to life. She wore a simple cream-colored Armani dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and devastating, her platinum hair caught in a loose chignon that allowed a few rebellious strands to frame her face. When their eyes met across the opulent foyer, Marco felt something electric shoot through his chest, a recognition that had nothing to do with employer and employee and everything to do with 2 souls acknowledging each other across an impossible divide. "You must be Marco," Sophia said, extending her hand with a smile that seemed genuine for the first time in months. Her voice carried traces of her upper-class London upbringing mixed with something softer, more vulnerable. "I hope Dmitry hasn't frightened you too badly with his security lectures." Their first drive together should have been routine, a simple trip to the Monte Carlo harbor where Sophia had a meeting with the Monaco Red Cross Committee. But as Marco navigated the winding roads above the Mediterranean, stealing glances at her in the rearview mirror, he noticed things that Dmitry's security briefings had never mentioned. The way her smile faded the moment she thought no one was looking, how her fingers trembled slightly when her phone buzzed with messages she clearly dreaded reading, the sadness that seemed to emanate from her like expensive perfume. "Have you ever been to Monaco before?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a taut wire. Her emerald eyes met his in the mirror, and Marco felt his carefully constructed professional demeanor begin to crack. "First time, Mrs. Petrov," he replied, his Brazilian accent making her name sound like music. "It's beautiful, but different from São Paulo. Everything here looks like it was built for gods instead of people." Sophia laughed, a sound so genuine and unexpected that Marco almost swerved. "That's exactly how I feel sometimes," she said, her voice dropping to something more intimate. "Like I'm living in a museum where I'm not allowed to touch anything, including myself." The confession hung in the air between them, dangerous and electric, crossing lines that Viktor had drawn with violent precision. Over the following weeks, their drives became the highlight of Sophia's suffocating existence. She began requesting longer routes to their destinations, asking Marco to take the scenic coastal roads where they could talk without the pressure of arriving anywhere specific. She learned that he sent most of his salary home to support his sick mother and younger sister, that he studied business courses online during his breaks, dreaming of someday starting his own security company. Marco discovered that Sophia had been a literature professor before her marriage, that she spoke 4 languages fluently, and that she wrote poetry in a leather journal she kept hidden in her purse like contraband. "Why did you give up teaching?" Marco asked during one of their longer drives along the Côte d'Azur, the Mediterranean sparkling like scattered diamonds below them. Sophia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "I didn't give it up," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was taken from me, along with everything else I thought I was." Viktor doesn't believe wives should work. He says it reflects poorly on his ability to provide. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and Marco found himself wanting to comfort her in ways that went far beyond his job description. The shift from professional courtesy to something deeper happened gradually, then suddenly, like falling asleep, and then off a cliff. Sophia began timing her errands to coincide with Monaco's most beautiful hours: sunset drives through the hills above the city, morning trips to the flower market when the light turned everything golden. Marco started bringing her books of Brazilian poetry, translated into French, which she would read aloud during their drives while he memorized the sound of her voice wrapping around words like saudade and paiseo. Their conversations grew more intimate, more dangerous, dancing around the attraction that sparked between them like live wires in water. The first touch came 3 weeks after Marco started working for her. Sophia had stumbled slightly getting out of the car at the casino square, her heel catching on the cobblestones, and Marco's hand shot out to steady her. For a moment, they stood frozen, his hand on her waist, her palm flat against his chest, both of them breathing too hard for such a simple interaction. "Thank you," she whispered, but neither of them moved away. The touch lasted only seconds, but it burned through both of them like a brand, marking the moment when they crossed from employer and employee into something far more dangerous. Their first kiss happened on a rain-soaked evening in late October, when Sophia had asked Marco to drive her to the old town above Monacoville. She claimed she wanted to see the prince's palace lit up against the storm clouds, but they both knew she was lying. They sat in the car, overlooking the harbor, watching the rain streak down the windows like tears, and the silence between them became so charged it was almost visible. "This is madness," Sophia whispered, but she was already turning toward him, her eyes dark with want and desperation and something that looked dangerously like hope. "Then let's be mad," Marco replied, and when their lips met, it felt like the world suddenly made sense for the first time in either of their lives. The kiss was desperate and hungry, 5 years of loneliness and 21 years of dreaming colliding in the front seat of Viktor's bulletproof Mercedes. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking, and Sophia had tears streaming down her face. "We can't do this," she said, even as her fingers traced the line of his jaw like she was memorizing it. "If Viktor finds out, he'll kill you. Literally. He's done it before. But some forces are too powerful to resist, and love, desperate, forbidden, dangerous love, was already rewriting both their fates in blood and passion, and the kind of beautiful destruction that changes everything forever." The apartment in La Condamine was perfect for secrets and sins. Sophia had found it through a discreet real estate agent who specialized in arrangements that required absolute privacy. A modest 2-bedroom flat tucked away on Rue Grimaldi, far enough from Monaco's glittering center to avoid recognition, but close enough that their absences wouldn't seem suspicious. At €12,000 per month, it was expensive for what amounted to 60 square meters of hidden desire, but Viktor's credit card paid without question, just another mysterious expense in a life full of them. The apartment had everything they needed: thick walls that muffled sound, neighbors who minded their own business, and windows that faced an interior courtyard where no telephoto lenses could capture what happened behind closed doors. Marco carried the key like it was made of molten gold, dangerous and precious, and capable of burning everything he touched. The first time Sophia handed it to him outside the Hermitage Hotel, their fingers brushed for just a moment, but the electricity between them was so intense that Marco was surprised other people couldn't see the sparks. "Thursday afternoon," she whispered, her emerald eyes dark with promise and fear. "Viktor flies to Geneva for meetings with Swiss bankers. We'll have 4 hours." For hours felt like both an eternity and an instant, enough time to cross every line they had been dancing around for weeks, but never enough to satisfy the hunger that consumed them both. The apartment smelled like vanilla candles and expensive perfume when Marco arrived that Thursday, his hand shaking as he turned the key in the lock. Sophia was waiting by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through sheer curtains, wearing a simple black dress that somehow managed to be more seductive than nudity. She had removed her wedding ring, and the pale circle of skin on her finger looked like a brand that was finally beginning to heal. "I've been thinking about this moment for weeks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been dying slowly in that marble prison, and you're the only thing that makes me feel alive." Their first kiss in the apartment was different from the desperate encounter in the rain-soaked car. This was slower, deeper, tinged with the knowledge that they finally had privacy and time to explore the fire that had been burning between them. Marco's hands traced the elegant line of her neck, memorizing the way she shivered when he touched the sensitive spot below her ear. Sophia pressed against him like she was trying to absorb his warmth, his youth, his capacity for genuine feeling in a world that had made her cold and empty. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked, even as his body betrayed how much he wanted her. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back." "I crossed that line the moment I looked at you," Sophia replied, and when she began unbuttoning his shirt with trembling fingers, Marco knew that they were both lost in the most beautiful way possible. Their lovemaking was tender and desperate simultaneously. 5 years of loneliness and 21 years of dreaming colliding in the modest bedroom that became their sanctuary. Sophia cried afterward, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being touched with genuine affection for the first time in years. Marco held her against his chest, feeling her heartbeat gradually slow from the frantic rhythm of passion to something deeper and more dangerous, the steady pulse of love taking root. "I never knew it could be like this," Sophia whispered against his skin, tracing lazy patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "With Viktor, intimacy was just another duty, another performance. But with you, I feel like I'm finally myself." Marco kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, and realized that he was in love with more than just her beauty or her elegance. He was in love with the woman she became when the masks fell away, vulnerable and real and heartbreakingly genuine. Their secret Thursday meetings became the axis around which both their lives revolved. Sophia would arrive at the apartment with bags from expensive boutiques, maintaining the appearance of shopping trips while her heart raced with anticipation. Marco would park 3 blocks away and enter through the building's back entrance, every precaution designed to protect their impossible romance. Inside their sanctuary, they created a world where social class and age differences and murderous husbands didn't exist, just 2 people discovering what it meant to be completely known and accepted by another human being. The physical passion between them was intoxicating, but it was the emotional intimacy that proved truly dangerous. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Sophia's abandoned dreams of becoming a published poet, Marco's plans to someday own a fleet of luxury cars, the books they loved, the places they wanted to travel together. "I want to take you to Rio," Marco said one afternoon as they lay tangled in the apartment's simple white sheets. "I want to show you the view from Sugarloaf Mountain at sunset, take you dancing in Lapa, introduce you to my mother as the woman I love. And I want to show you London," Sophia replied, her fingers intertwined with his. "The little bookshop in Bloomsbury where I used to spend entire afternoons. The park where I wrote my first poem, the life I had before I became Viktor's possession." These conversations were more intimate than their physical encounters, laying the groundwork for dreams that seemed impossible but felt absolutely essential for their survival. By November, they were making concrete plans for escape. Sophia had been secretly liquidating jewelry and transferring small amounts of money to accounts Viktor couldn't trace. Marco had been researching countries without extradition treaties, places where they could disappear and build new identities. "We could leave after New Year's," Sophia said during one of their clandestine meetings, her voice filled with hope and terror. "Viktor always spends January in Dubai on business. By the time he realizes I'm gone, we'll be somewhere he can't find us." But love makes people reckless, and their happiness was making them careless in ways that would prove fatal. Sophia glowed with contentment in a way that everyone around her began to notice. She smiled more frequently, hummed songs while getting dressed, and showed a renewed interest in life that couldn't be explained by charity work or shopping trips. Marco, intoxicated by love and the promise of freedom, had grown bolder in his devotion, lingering too long during their drives, looking at her with eyes that revealed everything to anyone who cared to notice. Neither of them realized that Dmitry Volkov had been watching, documenting, and preparing to report their betrayal to a man who considered his wife's infidelity not just a personal insult, but a declaration of war that could only be answered with blood. Dmitry Volkov had survived 20 years in Russian military intelligence by trusting his instincts more than his orders. And every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was wrong with Sophia Petrov's recent behavior. The woman who had spent 5 years moving through their penthouse like a beautiful ghost had suddenly come alive in ways that made his veteran spy senses tingle with alarm. She hummed while getting dressed, smiled at nothing in particular, and had developed an inexplicable interest in afternoon shopping trips that lasted far longer than any reasonable retail excursion should require. But it was the way she looked at Marco Silva that convinced Dmitry his suspicions were warranted. The lingering glances, the flush that crept up her neck when the young Brazilian spoke to her, the electricity that seemed to crackle between them, even during the most mundane conversations about destinations and schedules. Dmitry began his investigation the way he had been trained in the shadowy world of Soviet intelligence, methodically, invisibly, and with the patience of a predator stalking prey. He installed microscopic tracking devices in both Marco's personal car and the Mercedes he used to drive Sophia, positioning them where even experienced security personnel wouldn't think to look. GPS data revealed a disturbing pattern: detours to locations that had nothing to do with Sophia's stated destinations, extended stops in areas of Monaco where a billionaire's wife had no legitimate business, and frequent visits to a building on Rue Grimaldi that rental records showed had been leased by someone using Sophia's maiden name and paying in cash. The apartment discovery was the smoking gun Dmitry needed. Using contacts from his intelligence days, he obtained surveillance footage from nearby buildings, analyzed cell phone data that placed both targets in the same location during the same time windows, and even managed to plant listening devices in the apartment itself during one of their romantic interludes. What he heard through those devices made his blood run cold. Not because he was shocked by adultery, which was common enough among the wealthy elite, but because of the genuine emotion in their voices as they planned their escape from Viktor's world. "We could disappear completely," Marco's voice had whispered through the surveillance equipment. "South America, Southeast Asia, anywhere he can't follow us." Sophia's response had been even more damaging. "I have access to accounts he doesn't know about. We could take enough money to start over, to be free of him forever." These weren't just the desperate fantasies of forbidden lovers. They were concrete plans for betrayal and theft that would humiliate Viktor Petrov in front of the entire European criminal underworld. Viktor was in his study reviewing construction contracts when Dmitry requested an urgent private meeting, carrying a leather portfolio that would change 3 lives forever. The Russian oligarch's face remained perfectly composed as he reviewed the surveillance photographs, GPS tracking data, audio transcripts, and financial records that painted an unmistakable picture of his wife's infidelity. But Dmitry noticed the subtle signs of volcanic rage building beneath Viktor's controlled exterior. The whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the photographs, the slight tremor in his hands as he read transcripts of his wife declaring love for another man, the deadly stillness that settled over him like fog rolling in from the Mediterranean. "How long has this been going on?" Viktor asked, his voice so quiet it was barely audible above the ticking of the antique clock on his desk. "Based on the evidence, approximately 6 weeks for the physical relationship," Dmitry replied with military precision. "But the emotional connection appears to have been developing since the boy started working here." Viktor studied a photograph of Sophia and Marco kissing in the apartment doorway, their bodies pressed together with desperate intimacy. 6 weeks, he repeated, as if testing how the words tasted in his mouth. 6 weeks of my wife whoring herself with a Brazilian street rat, while I built an empire to keep her in luxury. The planning began immediately with the cold efficiency that had made Viktor billions in the brutal world of post-Soviet business. This wasn't going to be a crime of passion or a messy public scandal that would damage his reputation. It would be a calculated lesson in what happened to people who betrayed Viktor Petrov's trust. I want them to understand the magnitude of their mistake, Viktor told Dmitry as they reviewed options in the soundproof study. I want them to have time to comprehend what their love has cost them before they pay the ultimate price. Dmitry nodded, already formulating plans that drew on decades of experience in making problems disappear permanently. The trap was set with surgical precision during the first week of December, when Viktor announced he would be flying to Geneva for 3 days of meetings with Swiss banking officials. It was exactly the kind of business trip that had given Sophia and Marco their previous opportunities for extended time together, and Viktor was counting on their passion, making them predictable. "Make sure my wife has everything she needs while I'm away," Viktor told Marco with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I know how much she values your dedicated service." The double meaning was lost on Marco, who was already mentally planning their longest romantic encounter yet. Sophia's excitement was palpable as she prepared for what she believed would be 3 uninterrupted days with Marco in their secret apartment. She had even purchased new lingerie for the occasion, delicate French lace that cost more than most people's monthly salary, along with champagne and strawberries for a celebration that would never happen. "This might be our last time before we leave Monaco forever," she told Marco as they drove toward Rue Grimaldi on that crisp December morning. "After New Year's, we'll be free to love each other openly, anywhere in the world." But freedom was the last thing waiting for them in the apartment, where Viktor's men had been preparing a very different kind of reception. Dmitry had assembled a team of specialists whose skills went far beyond traditional security work. Men who understood that some lessons could only be taught through methods that left permanent impressions on both the students and anyone who might consider similar betrayals in the future. The apartment had been transformed from a sanctuary of love into something much darker, equipped with tools and restraints that would ensure both lovers understood exactly how much their happiness had cost. As Marco turned the key in the apartment lock for what would be the final time, neither he nor Sophia noticed the subtle changes that indicated they were walking into a trap 5 weeks in the making. The vanilla candles Sophia loved had been replaced with something that smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed dimmer somehow, as if the approaching storm clouds were an omen of what was about to unfold inside those walls where love had bloomed and was now about to be extinguished forever. The apartment door opened into hell disguised as their sanctuary. Viktor Petrov sat in the leather armchair they had made love beside countless times, his face carved from stone, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look like death attending a funeral. Dmitry stood behind him with 2 other men whose faces bore the kind of scars that came from years of inflicting pain professionally. The vanilla candles had been replaced with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look clinical and cold, like an operating theater where the surgery would be fatal. "Welcome home, my dear wife," Viktor said, his Russian accent thick with controlled rage. "I trust you've enjoyed your little vacation from reality." Sophia's blood turned to ice water in her veins as she realized their perfect love story had become a perfectly orchestrated trap. Marco stepped protectively in front of her, his young body trembling with adrenaline and terror, but still trying to shield the woman he loved from the monster she had married. "Mr. Petrov, this is between you and me," Marco said, his voice steadier than his hands. "Sophia never meant to hurt anyone. If you want to punish someone, punish me." Viktor's laugh was like breaking glass in an empty cathedral. "Oh, my Brazilian Romeo, you misunderstand completely. This isn't about punishment. This is about education. You're both going to learn exactly what happens when people steal from Viktor Petrov." What followed would haunt the investigators who eventually found the scene. Viktor had brought instruments that spoke of premeditation and a desire not just to kill, but to teach lessons that would echo through Monaco's criminal underworld for years. The torture began with questions delivered in Viktor's cultured voice, each inquiry punctuated by pain designed to extract not just answers, but dignity, hope, and the will to live. "Tell me about your escape plans," Viktor demanded as Dmitry's men secured both lovers to chairs positioned face to face, ensuring they could watch each other suffering. "Tell me about the money you plan to steal, the life you plan to build on my ruins." Sophia broke first, sobbing as she confessed everything: the secret accounts, the planned disappearance, the dreams they had whispered in darkness. But her confession only fueled Viktor's rage. 5 years, he hissed, pacing between their chairs like a predator, savoring wounded prey. 5 years I gave you everything a woman could want, and you repay me by spreading your leg for a street rat who makes less in a year than I spend on wine. Marco fought against his restraints, desperate to protect Sophia, even as his own blood stained the apartment floor. You never loved her, he gasped through broken teeth. You treated her like property, like one of your paintings. At least I saw her as human. The words signed his death warrant. Viktor's carefully maintained composure cracked, and what emerged was the brutal animal who had clawed his way out of post-Soviet poverty by leaving bodies in his wake. The murders, when they finally came, were almost merciful compared to the hours of systematic cruelty that preceded them. Viktor personally delivered the killing blows, needing to feel their lives end under his hands. This is what happens to people who betray me, he whispered to each of them before they died. This is the price of your beautiful love story. The cleanup was professional and thorough, or so Viktor believed. The bodies were dissolved in acid in a warehouse outside Monaco, their remains scattered in the Mediterranean during a midnight yacht trip. The apartment was sanitized, all traces of the love affair erased along with the lovers themselves. Viktor returned to his penthouse and resumed his life as if nothing had happened, playing the role of the concerned husband whose wife and driver had mysteriously disappeared together. But love leaves traces that even professional killers can't completely erase. Sophia had been more careful than Viktor realized, keeping detailed journals of their relationship, along with photographs and letters that she had hidden in a safety deposit box using her maiden name. When a Swiss bank noticed that the account hadn't been accessed in months, they followed legal protocols that eventually led Monaco police to evidence of the affair and Viktor's motives for murder. Marco's family in Sao Paulo, desperate for answers about their missing son, hired a private investigator who discovered the young man's secret relationship and began asking uncomfortable questions that reached Viktor's enemies in the European criminal underworld. These men, always eager to damage Viktor's reputation, provided information that helped piece together the timeline of the murders. The arrest came during one of Viktor's charity galas, in front of 500 members of Monaco's elite society. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Viktor maintained his innocence with the same cold arrogance that had characterized his entire life. This is a mistake that will cost you everything, he told the arresting officers. But the evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, financial records, witness testimony, and physical evidence that Dmitry had been sloppy enough to leave behind. The trial lasted 6 months and revealed the full extent of Viktor's brutality to a horrified public. Dmitry, facing the death penalty, testified against his former employer in exchange for life imprisonment, providing graphic details that left even seasoned prosecutors shaken. He wanted them to suffer, Dmitry told a packed courtroom. He said their love was an insult that could only be washed clean with blood. On March 15, 2025, Viktor Petrov was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the premeditated murders of his wife and her lover. His final appeal was denied, and he was executed exactly 1 year after the murders, on the anniversary of the day love died in a modest apartment on Rue Grimaldi. His last words were reportedly a continued denial of guilt and a promise that his death would be avenged. Marco's family used the compensation money from Viktor's seized assets to establish a foundation helping young immigrants pursue education in Europe. The foundation, named in Marco's memory, has helped hundreds of young people achieve the dreams that were stolen from him in that blood-soaked apartment. Sophia's story became a cautionary tale about the price of forbidden love in a world where money and power can turn passion into punishment. Her hidden journals were published posthumously, revealing a woman who had found herself through love only to lose everything to her husband's obsessive need for control. The apartment building on Rue Grimaldi was demolished 6 months after the trial. In its place stands a small memorial garden dedicated to victims of domestic violence, though it doesn't mention Sophia and Marco by name. Local residents say that sometimes, on quiet evenings, you can still hear the echo of laughter from lovers who believed, for a brief and beautiful moment, that love could conquer everything. In Monaco's Casino Square, where it all began, The wealthy still play their games of chance and power. But everyone knows the story of the Russian oligarch who discovered that some bets, like trying to own another person's heart, always end with the house winning and lovers paying the ultimate price. 3 lives destroyed by obsession, 2 hearts silenced by brutality, and one man's empire built on violence finally crumbling under the weight of his own cruelty. In the end, Sophia Carrington learned that she hadn't sold her soul for her family's survival. She had sold it for the chance to love and be loved, even if that love would cost her everything in the shadow of Monaco's glittering casinos.